It's nice to see so many familiar faces, and it's great to be here. It was nice to hear Prem talk about what it takes to actually build agentic systems in a bank like Capital One. I think we need more Prems at banks, frankly. It would be nice to see that, folks that are thinking so systematically about building agentic systems. I think all of you know I've heard the phrase agentic finance and agents in finance. And if you didn't before today, you definitely have heard it today. But I'm not confident you can really describe it to your family at Thanksgiving next week. I suspect that could be a challenge. I can't promise that's what we're going to achieve, but our ambition is to kind of get into that a bit. It's sort of part 2 of the conversation from Prem. What does it take to build agents in finance? What are they? What does it take to build them? What does it take to deploy them? And I'm not going to give the full bios for Soups and Dan. You should look them up. They're phenomenal people with amazing backgrounds. But the shorthand for you for this conversation is Soups is building agents in a very high fidelity environment to fight fraud, to fight scams. And Dan has built systems on which you build agents. So we're going to kind of tap their brains to understand how do you build it and in which way you facilitate building it, okay? So to get started, a question for both of you. Maybe start with you, Soups. How do you define agents in finance? And part of, I want to tempt Michael Barr's word. He invented a word today, so I don't know if I can really bring it up. But we are basically going from automation to autonomy. I think he had a different word. I don't know if you guys remember that.
I like it.
Automaticity? Okay, all right. Thank you. We'll stay with automation and autonomy.
I like that too.
You like to do, okay. So how do you distinguish from sort of the automation of years? Is it really autonomy that we're talking about? And then talk about some use cases and things that really excite you.
Yeah, absolutely. So at Sardine, we help banks and financial institutions with fighting fraud, scams, and financial crime compliance using machine learning and AI. So the use cases that we encounter, in fact, I do have a video up here, which I wanted to show you guys, a deep fake. I don't know if that's the cue to get it. Okay, maybe not yet.
Oh, yeah, it is. It's up.
Oh, it's up. Yeah, that's right. There you go. Yeah. So that's me. On the right-hand side was me. On the left-hand side, I was deep faking my customer, which is the head of risk of Gusto. And how much did it cost me to do it? A full $0, right? And how long did it take me to do the whole setup the first time? 2 hours. And after that, when I'm live in a customer call or talking to a customer, just take a screenshot of them, of their face, and then after that, I can actually swap.
That's you.
Right.
Okay.
Yeah. So
it doesn't look like you.
Yeah.
Exactly.
The picture that you see later is me, but the face has been swapped to be my customer. And that's what I'm doing in all my Zoom calls. My last board meeting, I showed up as my investor.
You don't endorse this. You don't want others to do this. But
No, but as a fraud company, we are trying to always break the system ourselves so that we can then go back and catch it. And now the next screen that you see over there as it keeps going is if you had our technology at the bank or a financial institution where you're doing an account opening, or when you're doing an interview of a candidate, when you're doing a video interview, right? Or when you're in a conference with what have you, with your board. In all those places, if you have our piece of software in the video frame, then we can detect that it's a deep fake in real time, right? And the way we are doing it is, of course, there's many methods. So there are methods which look at differences in pixels, et cetera. But the way we go about it is we are going straight to the source as to how the hell are they injecting the video back into the camera. That's how we detect it. But now the broader framing of what Sardine does is, Warren Buffett has said that fraud will be the biggest industry of all time, right? And no one bets against Warren Buffett. And then second stat that I'll share with you is that $1 trillion were lost by consumers to fraud and scams worldwide. There are certain countries in the Southeast Asia, Cambodia, Myanmar, et cetera, where 25% of their GDP comes from running scam centers. 116 billion were lost by Americans to scams, right? So the fundamental tenet of identity online is broken, right? So you no longer can trust, with your regular KYC processes, is this person really who they say they are, right? Or when you're receiving a phone call from your bank, is it really your bank calling you, right? So there's so many bank refund scams, right? And where we come in, therefore, are to fight AI-generated scams. We have systems which can fight them using AI. That's what you saw. Then the second part of it where we come in is financial crime compliance. So most of our bank clients, they are now adopting agentic AI technologies to automate or make more efficient things like sanction screening, onboarding reviews, transaction monitoring reviews, SAR filing, et cetera. And that's where we have a variety of AI agents.
So, Max was saying we are very early. So are these indeed agentic? So could you say a little bit more on exactly how are they agentic?
Yeah, 100%. So these are really
This is all Chatham House.
Okay.
Basically all friends here. So just tell us everything.
Awesome, yeah. Yeah, so the way to think about agentic system and how do they differ from a rules-based system in a very simple manner would be a rules-based system. You once create the rule and it is like stagnant after that. It doesn't adapt, right? Whereas an agentic system will constantly adapt itself, right? So for instance, when we are using AI agents to do sanction screening, or when we're using them to do KYB or CDD of businesses, right? So we are gathering information from online, right? And we first make a first pass at it, like for let's say ID verification. We may have an ID where the name is in a different character base than Latin, right? Maybe Arabic. And then maybe the month, like date of birth is written in a different format, year first. Different countries have different formats, right? So you could sit down and create rules where saying like, for this country, I gotta have year first. For that country, I've gotta have month first, et cetera, et cetera. And then that country might change their format itself, right? So therefore, the static rules-based system will never keep up with it. But an agentic system will always adapt and will always extract things and then compare it to the other data points which were provided and tell you if this is the person who they say they are. Is the name on the ID the same as what they entered in the form, right?
Dan, you are building, as I mentioned earlier, effectively underlying architecture on which you can build agents. Isn't that already available to us through the LLMs? Why do we need something new? And in order, you're building this, so you effectively, it's a critique of what exists now. So what are the gaps that you're trying to address?
That's a great question, thanks. So I, professor at UC Berkeley, CTO at Scale Cognition. The Scale Cognition is a modeling company, and what we build is models, essentially think about models that are, flexible and contextual, like an LLM, but on which you can make guarantees. And that includes things like determinism properties and also things like anti-hallucination properties. So one of the things that's really out there right now, there's been this explosion of popularity of large language models in the kind of, their basic form now is it's a condensation of all the stuff that's out on the web into this very broad generalist model. They're incredible in their breadth and in their plasticity, but they have significant drawbacks that stem from the sort of probabilistic nature of how they're constructed. People worry about non-determinism, people worry about hallucinations. Why do these things happen? They're actually fundamental to how these models are built. You expect to have that, and that's why there's a lot of people out there saying, look, just get used to building on Jello, right? You're gonna have these things, it's gonna be bad.
In fact, we heard it today.
Yeah, get used to building on Jello. I don't believe this at all. We build models that are not Jello. And I think what happens is when you have a tool, you try to hit everything with that tool. And if your tool is an LLM, it's a probabilistic non-deterministic thing. What do people do? Well, you bring in a second LLM to check the first LLM. And as the joke goes, now you've got two problems. And not only that, you've got increased latency, increased cost. This is great if you're being paid by the token, but otherwise, not so great. So our research focus and the core differentiator in our product is the ability to have models where you can make much stronger guarantees on what they will do. And in addition, on their auditability, the ability to say, okay, if this piece of information appears, I know where it came from. I know it came from an approved place. I can trace it through the system, and that's because the system fundamentally operates at a different level. LLMs that are out there today, they operate in this autoaggressive prediction of tokens. You have some context, you predict the next token, basically the next word. And in a system like this, the only thing there ever is a probabilistic distribution over the next word. We built systems that are designed to produce not the truth, but outputs that are indistinguishable from the truth. And that's the problem. So and I think it's also important to remember that in many applications, the hallucination is the product. So for example, if you go to an image generator, like Midjourney, and you want to generate an image, you're actually hoping that you don't get an image that was seen during training. You're hoping for a hallucination. But you're taking similar kinds of technologies.
You're hoping for something new.
You're hoping for something new. Or if you go to ChatGPT and you give me an idea for a fantasy story, you don't want it to give you Lord of the Rings, right? You want something new. On the other hand, if you go and you ask your banking system for your account balance, you don't want a plausible sounding balance. You don't want like creativity there. You want to know that what you get is actually the truth. So as humans, we don't operate in this way. We don't just sort of use correlations in the language and the context to narrow down what word is going to be next. We have what's called metacognition. When I ask an LLM, what's the population of Berkeley, it's going to put some number out there. Maybe that number's right if it's seen the fact a bunch of times, but all it knows is there's some distribution of what's reasonable and it picks one. If I ask a human this, they stop, they think, they actually do computation over whether they know this information, sort of in the same way a database does. The information's in there or it's not. This is metacognition. And the standard models out there do not do this. And this is really the core of what we do. But I think until you start seeing...
We do have some political leaders that lack metacognition. You know, this is a reality.
Metacognition is really important for people and machines. And so what I think my message to everybody here would be, although there's been this explosive growth of this one kind of LLM where you scale up and up and up, there are deficiencies, but there are also other technological approaches. And what we're going to see over time is things that you can build on that are not Jello.
You know, you touched on this. Part of what we want, the outcomes we want in finance, need to be deterministic.
Definitely.
Right? I mean, especially in what you're doing, you know, in order to fight what you just showed us, we need things that work in a defined manner. But this world that we are talking about is probabilistic, and that's been the through line of the conversation today. How do you guys see that tension, and how do we address the fundamental questions on people's mind of reliability, explainability, you know, in this world? So, Soups, maybe if you want to go first.
Yeah, no, absolutely. So
like, you want your stuff to give you the outcomes you want because you don't want it to be doing things that
100%,
are...
yeah.
So how do you achieve that?
Yeah, the way these models, which are based on LLMs, as Dan just mentioned, the existing LLMs, they hallucinate. So which therefore means that when we are building AI agents on top of those LLMs, we have realized that you have to give them as narrow a scope as possible, right? If you give them too broad a scope, then there's more chances of hallucinating. So that's step number one. And therefore, what we're doing is we're building really, really like special purpose AI agents which have a very narrow scope. For example, we have OSINT agents, like open source intelligence agents, which can do research on a business, research on a person or an address, et cetera. That's a very narrow scope. You bring back the output of it, and then you chain it together with other agents to do the task at hand, right? And then the step number two is like in the LLM community, they know this term evals. It's just a fancy word to say that you're essentially, doing audit of the decisions being made by your agents, right? So, for instance, in the world of sanction screening, we want 100% accuracy of detecting the folks who should be or who are on the OFAC list. You cannot have anything less than 100% accuracy, right? So therefore, what we do is we actually make sure that when we are training or tuning these agents, that we are like always looking at the outputs. And also, this is when it's in production, you're always looking at the outputs. Like in banking world, usually you do like some sample of population and audit on it. When you're working with an LLM, you can actually do 100% sampling. So we do 100% sampling. We always take a look at what did the AI produce, and then did a human actually override the decision? And on the basis of that, you go back and retrain it, right? So that's in a nutshell how we do it.
Dan, do you have thoughts on?
Yeah, I mean, essentially, there's the approach you take to making things robust. There's sort of a stack approach. This is, sometimes you have no choice. Something like networking where the underlying wire is noisy and so you have to build layer on layer on layer of error recovery. You can also just use different tools. I think the biggest problem in the industry right now is we're using tools that were designed for their non-determinism, for deterministic applications, and we've inherited a lot of problems. I think, actually, I can go back to your first question, which is what makes something agentic, which is really relevant, which is, to me, the key thing that makes a system agentic. What does that mean, like agent, agency? An agentic system is one that makes decisions. Ultimately, that's what makes something an agent, is it's making decisions in some context. It doesn't, I mean, you can be agentic even if you're making bad decisions or you're rule-based, probabilistic. Like, what makes you an agent is that you're making decisions. This is different from an instruction following system. So if you have a smart speaker and you tell it to set a timer, it sets a timer, right? And it is doing what you told it, right? You are essentially pushing buttons, in this case, with your voice, and that can be it can be a very complicated instruction that it follows. But an agentic system is one that's making decisions. Once a system is making decisions, who are those decisions? Like, what utility function is it optimizing? Is it optimizing the user? Probably not. If you call your bank up, the user says, you know, give me double my balance. Well, like, an instruction following system would be like, I'll get right on that. Like, or an agent needs to say, I'm not allowed to do that. Here's what I can do. If a user asks for a refund, well, there's some policy. If there is some sequence of APIs that are being orchestrated in order to accomplish some goal, there are rules that are associated to that need to be respected. And the challenge always comes in the gap between the utility of the agent, what is it trying to optimize? For example, people talk a lot about reinforcement learning training. If you have a shipping company and you have an agent that's gonna tell your customers the status of their package, and you say optimize your customer happiness score, the thing is going to discover very quickly that when you say, where's my package, the customer will be happier. The customer will be happier if you say it'll be there tomorrow than your package was lost. And so now suddenly it's lying to you. It's not being deceptive, it's optimizing exactly what you told it to. And so people worry in terms of like alignment. People worry about things like paperclip factories. But anytime you try to write down what a system should be optimizing, there's any kind of daylight, you're gonna get behavior like this, hallucinations. And so ultimately, you need not only the agent and what it is optimizing, you also need the policies and the business logic that says not just what it should do, but what it may do, what can it do. And that ultimately, being able to think and express that clearly, right now that's very hard because the technologies that are dominant out there fall under what I would call prompt and pray. Right, your prompt doesn't work, you put it in all caps, maybe it'll work now, you add some exclamation points. Once you've added your third exclamation point, you're like fresh out of ideas, okay? And so you need better control surfaces, and these are gonna come, right? They're gonna come from a variety of different kinds of innovations. We're thinking about these things in academia, we're building these things in industry, but the largest general tools do not come with these control surfaces now. So that's, I think, something that's gonna be very important as a community for us to figure out.
But, you know, isn't there the inherent tension that we were just talking about earlier and we were talking about before this panel between sort of how these underlying models are designed and the outcomes we are seeking? You said there is a way to get to robustness, but I didn't quite understand how do we get to robustness? Do you mind trying again? How do we get to robustness?
Yeah, I think the reality is the whole tech stack needs really to be changed. You need other control surfaces other than just the prompt. You need training data that is...
So move beyond prompts.
I think it's move beyond prompts, move beyond models that are, move beyond the kinds of models we have today. They're great, they're scaled up. I think it is so impressive the breadth and plasticity of these models, but it comes with all kinds of costs. I think one of the things we're gonna see is increasingly specialist models. Specialist can mean narrow in scope, but it doesn't have to. Right? Specialist can also mean specialized. It can be an expert in what it's doing, and what this can get you as well is better performance, right? Systems that are more performant. Things where we can make stronger privacy guarantees because the system can be located on-prem or in your virtual private cloud.
So in a way, robustness is about atomic, not autonomous, but atomic, small scale. That's when you start getting closer to the...
Yeah. It's about I mean, ultimately it is about sort of structure and modularity and control and how these things come together to let you understand what your system can and cannot do. My preferred way of doing this is what we do at Scale Cognition, which is we have models which have these properties to begin with, but one way or another, you have to get this, and right now there are multiple ways to get at it, but you cannot just unleash this general thing that is just as happy to like write you a haiku about some medical symptoms as it is to check your balance, right? These are things that the model doesn't have to do, and in fact, you find yourself going out of your way to make sure it doesn't do them.
So if I may, like one example would be, right, for example, one of the most common things we have to do in financial crime compliance is name matching, right? But if you use a general purpose LLM for name matching, it'll get you along for most of the way, but we are at the next frontier, which is we're trying to train a foundational model just for the purpose of name matching. What that means is like any machine learning or even an AI system, it is only good as the data that goes into it, right? The current open source LLMs, they haven't been trained on the credit header data, right? However, you know, a more specialized LLM.
That's a good thing.
It's a it's a good thing, but also like, you know, name matching is therefore not solved, right? Because you don't have a great data dictionary of all the common names, common pseudonyms for a name, right? So which is where, like, if you took it to the next level, right, you actually start training it on closed source data, then you can get it to perform much, much better, right?
What you've described, both of you have more questions now, but we have not a lot of time as a result of that. But I want to zoom out now a bit and talk about, from your perspective, because you are kind of at the frontier of building these things, do you have advice for the builders and the policymakers in the room? Earlier, you know, Soups, you were talking about model governance and questions and issues around that. So maybe we start there, and then Dan, for you.
Yeah, so so in our conversations with regulators that we're having, you know, there's a shift, right? In the sense that regulators are now more open to the use of AI in making financial crime compliance more automated, right? And for those in the audience that, you know, have a counter view, I'd love to discuss with you, or, you know, have a more sort of thoughtful debate about it. But the point of view that we have is that, you know, the old way of doing financial crime compliance was that I should just throw more bodies at the problem. But of course, that doesn't scale. Like whenever there is a regulatory fine on a bank, the first reaction is, let me just go hire 10 times more people. But then it only scales up to a certain level. However, now the new way of doing it would be, why can't I make my existing staff, you know, more efficient and give them better tools? Of course, within the framework of model governance, where, you know, we are making sure that there is some sort of a control framework around what the AI is doing.
And it's different than what exists today, because what's underpinning increasingly agents in finance are these AI models, which is the governance frameworks are for previous generation.
It's actually the same.
It's the same, okay.
Yeah, so at least the point, the way we are seeing it is that the same sort of model governance framework you had for machine learning systems is actually the same thought and the same process can be used for AI governance.
So that's your message. Your message is the same framework works.
Correct, yeah. And we published a white paper on this as well. You can go to, you can search up Agentic Oversight Framework. The whole point of it is that any outputs out of an AI agent, sanction and screening, transaction monitoring alerts, et cetera, so long as you always have an audit built on top of it, right? Like you maybe, you know, you did some sampling, you had a human review what the agent did, and then pass that information back. So long as you do it daily, right, you can always catch drift. And that's the whole point here, right, to catch drift. Right?
Dan, any advice for builders or policymakers?
Such a fast-changing space. I guess one piece of advice I would have is to, you know, think really hard about which properties of a system are important, which are the things where you really do need determinism and you need to be able to make guarantees about behavior. I would say there are a lot of messages out there, you know, about, you know, get used to building on Jello, or don't, you know, get used to not having your data be private. I think it is very important for industries to really think, like, if the data is sensitive and needs to be private, it can stay private. And if things need to be accurate, they can be accurate. And this technology, transformation that we're in. Like, we are at the start of it, and I don't think we need to immediately jump to this idea. I mean, particularly because, you know, if two wrongs don't make a right, I don't think two non-deterministic systems make a deterministic system. So I would just encourage people to think about not the fastest possible use of a technology that was built for a completely opposite purpose, but rather what are the right technologies that will let us do what we need to do in situations where mistakes, an agent makes decisions, decisions have consequences, and if mistakes in those decisions have high cost, I think we need to make sure we're focusing on technologies that can deliver against that. And by the way, it's not, I think, just banking. I have yet to meet anybody wanting to deploy agents who doesn't feel like mistakes have a high cost to them.
You know, since you're talking, Dan, and looking at the time, last question to both of you, and others have been asked this question: what might be different a year from now, 3, 5 years from now? A twist on that question. What do you think needs to change for, you know, wider adoption of agentic systems? What would you want to work differently, you know, so we see a different outcome a year from now, 3 years from now? I'm going to ask you to go first.
Oh, I want to go first here.
You got to think on your feet.
All right, what's going to be different in a year? I think some of the directions that are going to be different are, first of all, I think there's going to be more and more technologies appearing, right? I think what we're seeing is with the current large language models, we are hitting various points of diminishing returns and doubling down on train on more data. There is no more web, right? There's data of other kinds, but that's new challenges. And this idea that kind of more and bigger and noisier is going to solve all the problems, I feel like what we're going to see in the next year is movement towards models, towards technology stacks which are more controllable, which have properties that are easier to guarantee and easier to work with, and tech stacks that are more reliable. We have grown used to building complex systems, whether it's organizations or software or any kind of engineering. We've grown used to building systems that can be divided and put together, and where the boundaries are well understood and describable, and that pressure is still there, and we're going to have that, I think, back increasingly as the technology evolves.
Soups?
I think, really quickly, I think AI is going to really disrupt several businesses that we are not even thinking about. For example, how many of you in this room ever even pick up a phone call anymore? Like, I never pick up a phone call because most of them are scams. Google calls me every single day, 10 times a day, Google, right? So telco will be disrupted. Banking, you know, there are folks who are thinking about, can there be like agentic banking? So if I took a 10-year horizon view, then there are things that we don't think about today that will be totally disrupted. Right?
But I think specifically in fraud and scams world, do you expect some, because of the level in which this is happening, a big shift taking place?
Yeah, in the world of fraud, scams, cybersecurity, et cetera, if you're not adopting agentic AI, the fraudsters or the bad nation-state actors are going to quickly overtake you. So therefore, this is the time to actually start thinking about agentic technology so that you can stay a step ahead of the bad actors. Right?
Well, thank you both, guys. Join me in thanking them. I'm going to hand it over to Hans.